Welcome back. All right, so we are in the midst of the season that is full of surprises. As far as I'm concerned, there's a lot of teams that are surprised both in the positive, thus the red and the happy face, and the negative, the panicked face, right? So, with this in mind, I want to take a look at 7 teams that I think have been off to starts that we may not have expected them to be this good, and 7 that are off to starts that are underwhelming, right? We're expected to be better. So we'll start with the expected to be better. At number 7 on the board is Calgary. Currently, they're above the playoff line, right? They had the good run through California. It was not expected they'd need to win in California before the Christmas break to be above the playoff line at the Christmas break. This was a team that was supposed to have, at the very least, made it so they were just as good as last year. There was some argument about whether or not adding Uyghur to the blue line made that blue line even stronger. Of course, injuries are an issue with almost every team in the league. You can argue about certain injuries with Calgary. I would also say that Markstrom has come down to a more normal level for his play, and that's affected the numbers as well. Markstrom was stealing some games early last year. So for Calgary, I'm going to put them in number 7. There are 6 teams that I think have been more disappointing or surprising in how they've played in that disappointing realm. But I'm not going to have Calgary higher than that. They are above the playoff line. Number 7 on the positive side is Vegas. Now, the expectation was that with the injuries out of the way, that they would get better. But there was still some concern about the fact that, Dodonov's gone, Pacioretty's gone. It's a lot of goals from last year's team that were gone. Leonard gets hurt, and he's not going to play this season. Now, I had more faith with Thompson than I think a lot of people did. And because there was expectations during the summer, like, well, Vegas is going to have to get a new starting goaltender, which they didn't, because they didn't need one. They had one in Thompson. He was there all along. But at any rate, Vegas, it has been surprising to see that they're not only first in their division, but pretty comfortably in first place. Now, while it's possible that could change after the Christmas break, the reality is so far Vegas looks like easily the best team in the Pacific Division after a down year where they missed the playoffs. And I think the surprising thing has been they haven't skipped a beat despite players missing out of their lineup and players being gone from last year's roster. And like I said, just going with a rookie goaltender as the starter. There's a lot of risk there. Number 6 on the disappointing side of things for me is Nashville. Nashville was expected to at least be a playoff team. Currently, they're below the playoff line. They're more of a disappointment to me than Calgary based on that. So based on that reality that Nashville's outside of a playoff spot, I will put them as more disappointing than Calgary. We can have the debate, though, about which team is really and truly more disappointing, and I'm sure people will have that debate in the comment section. And I've been avoiding those debates this week because I'm kind of off. So for Nashville, it's been a tough one. I'm not sure how they fix this either. The team just doesn't look like they're going to make the playoffs. That can change. We have a lot of games left. They're not that far out. But they look like a team that could surprisingly miss the playoffs in the West. As I've been saying over the last little while here, there are going to be good teams that miss the playoffs in both conferences, although it will be seen that it's more egregious the teams that miss the playoffs in the East. One team that's going to miss the playoffs in the East and was expected to is Montreal. But Montreal has had a much better run so far than was expected. They were expected to be down in the same region as where Chicago is, as where Arizona and other teams of that ilk are. And yet they're better than that. And Suzuki and Caulfield have been absolutely fantastic. Their goaltending's been better than expected, especially Montembeault. And so, Montreal has stayed in the hunt. They're not expected to remain in any kind of a hunt for a playoff spot for much longer. But the fact that they're ahead of Florida is nothing short of remarkable, which tells you Florida's going to be on this side of the board. Montreal's on the hotter side of the board. And I think it bodes well for the future. Marty St. Louis has proven so far that he deserves, at least one more full season with this team. It'll be remarkable to see what they're able to accomplish when Marty St. Louis has that experience and you have more than that full year of time as coach of the Montreal Canadiens. I also want to say, if anybody's expecting Arizona in this video, Arizona for me is an honorable mention on the positive side because they do win games that they're not expected to, and they work very, very hard. So I wanted to wear Arizona, and I thought, why not go with the reverse retro? Number 5 on the negative side of things is Vancouver. Vancouver, I'm not saying that they were locked to make the playoffs or anything. I picked them to make the playoffs. My bad. Vancouver, and it's the first time I've ever picked them to make the playoffs that I can remember, although I think I picked them in 2021 as well, and that turned out to be wrong. So for Vancouver, I try to be optimistic, but the fact that the disastrous start, Demko not looking like Demko, the injuries that have taken place, just the sheer disaster of it, JT Miller's defense, which has never been fantastic, really being prominent for all the wrong reasons so far this year. So for Vancouver, it has been, I'm not saying that they're on this side of the board because they're not in a playoff spot. It's just how disastrous a lot of this season has been. So they do have a lot of wins in extra time recently, right? And they've been able to win enough games to end up staying at 500, but they're not able to get that momentum to carry over against the really good teams. There is the hope that the 5-2 win over Edmonton going into the break is going to catapult them. Tomorrow night they're against San Jose. That's a winnable game. That would put them above NHL 500. It does not take them off the board, though. So Vancouver, to me, is number 5 on the most disappointing. On the most surprising in the positive sense is Dallas at number 5. So the Dallas Stars, I don't think them being in a playoff spot is a surprise as much as they're first in the Central. And while they've had some beats lately that they haven't looked that great, the game against Edmonton comes to mind as an example. There are other ones too where their goal scoring has been a bit of a struggle here and there. There are some cracks with Dallas, so I don't have Dallas up higher than 5th, but still, first place in the division. They look quite good at times, and I think that their being first place is a bit of a surprise to some. There was an expectation that there could be more struggles than there have been, and yeah, we'll see how they do in the second half of the season, but so far, so good. Number 4 on the disappointing side of things, another Canadian team. So 3 out of the first 4 are Canadian teams, and it's Ottawa. Ottawa was expected to be much better. Ottawa was expected to be one of those teams that was, if not in the playoffs, at least in the mix. And so far, it's not working. There's a lot of calls for DJ Smith to be replaced from fans. I've seen in the media some discussion about DJ Smith and his job as well. Although I haven't seen anything specifically from a media member that I can recall that says he should go. And I'm on the fence with it because I don't know that necessarily fixes the Sens. But they're definitely underperforming. And I would think DJ Smith, at the end of this season, if they continue to track in this direction, he probably is going to end up having to find another job. Because that's the nature of the business. And I've seen some complaints when I talk about, coaches potentially being fired and players being rentals, and you can't talk about them like they're just commodities, and yet they kind of are. That's just the nature of sport, and it sucks, and I'm sure it has to suck for those players and coaches and GMs too that get thrown around as whether or not they should lose their jobs or whether or not they should be gone. But it is part and parcel of playing in the National Hockey League, coaching in the National Hockey League, and managing in the National Hockey League. And for Ottawa, players, coaches, management, just in general, should be concerned with how Ottawa's playing. This was supposed to be the start of something good. And if Eugene Melnyk was overseeing this, I almost guarantee we would have had a soundbite from him already about how frustrated he was with this team's play, because they're not cheaping out on this roster either. So you can bet on Melnyk being quite vocal if he was able to be vocal regarding this. I think that would probably have already been a video topic all by itself. Number 4 on the positive side of things is New Jersey. Now, the Devils have been tracking in the wrong direction over the last month, right? And I think there's a lot of people that jumped onto the bandwagon of the Devils that have now jumped off of said bandwagon. I am not off of said bandwagon. I still think they've accrued enough points, and I think they're a good enough team they should make the playoffs, right? I'm not concerned that the Devils aren't going to make the playoffs. I think that's still probable. And for that alone, they're in the positive. They weren't expected to be this much better this season. There was an expectation that maybe New Jersey, maybe Detroit would get better, and one of them might push for a wild card. But yeah, the Devils were first in the division. They're not now. And there is that possibility that they drop into a wild card and maybe drop out. But at this stage, I would still say they're a positive surprise. Absolutely. The fact we're having this conversation is a positive. Number 3 on the negative side is Columbus. Columbus was expected to be a lot better too. The addition of Johnny Gaudreau was offset by the loss of Oliver Bjorkstrand, and I've talked about that before. Columbus has had a lot of injury problems. There are teams on this side of the board that have had injury problems. Injuries have become really quite a problem in the NHL. Like, the amount of teams right now that are dealing with some major injuries, it feels like it's higher than normal. I haven't seen the man games loss numbers, but it feels like right now we're suffering through a lot of teams going through injury problems. In Columbus, what is it, 10 regulars that are either out or have been out recently, and it feels like they're about half the roster that they should be. And even with that full roster, it's debatable whether or not they'd be a playoff team. But without those players, they're not even close. And they may very well be the worst team in the league right now, which is a very, very much a surprise and could be tied to those injury problems as well. Number 3 on the positive side of things, Seattle. How could I not mention Seattle, the team that had 60 points last year and has 40 points already this year? Seattle, it's been remarkable. I've seen some comments along the lines of whether or not it's real. Oh, well, it's not going to last. They're not going to make it. But every year we have that argument where certain teams will get off to a good start and people will have that they're not going to make it comment to be made every 10 seconds. But some of those teams do make it. And Seattle, I think, has a decent chance because it is in the Pacific. And the Pacific, we've seen some underperforming from, as mentioned, Calgary. On some level, Edmonton as well. Edmonton's not on this board because I don't feel like with Edmonton's record being right around the same as it was last year, I don't know that I qualify them as underperforming right now. Not more so than Calgary anyways. It's definitely a debate to be had there. But Seattle has been remarkable, and I hope they stay in that spot because it's always fun to see a team in its first playoffs. Always fun. Whether it's a 4-game sweep or whether it's a nice long run they end up going on in that first playoff appearance, it is always fun to see a team getting that first chance and a fan base getting that first chance to see playoff hockey. So we'll see if that turns out for them. Number 2 on the negative side of things, the panic side of things, if you want to call it that, is St. Louis. The St. Louis Blues, I'm not sure which team is the real St. Louis. The winning streaks, the losing streaks seem to have passed now. They're into a more regular one up, one down kind of play. But I don't know what to expect with St. Louis from one week to the next. And it's been a down year for them, comparatively speaking, with what was expected before the season started. They're currently a 500 team. They're not given very good odds to make the playoffs, and that is a surprise. So I have St. Louis at number 2. Guys can probably guess what's number 1, but we'll come back to it. Number 2 on the positive side, the Jets. Because the Jets before the season, all of the discussions of whether or not this roster was stale, they didn't make any major changes, so they're not going to be very good. They lost Stastny, they're going to miss Stastny. They haven't replaced players. Is Riddick good enough to be a backup? There were a lot of questions about this team, and so far everything's going really well for Winnipeg. They're in the hunt for that first place with Dallas, which was not expected. And so, even though Winnipeg goes into the break with back-to-back losses, I do not look at those losses and say, well, the losses against Boston and Washington mean they aren't having a good year. That's not a thing. So Winnipeg has had a really, really strong run so far this year, and it's great to see. If Winnipeg could go on a run in the playoffs, that'd be even better. So number 1 on the disappointing side of things is Florida. So the discussion of how good Florida really is, the one thing I said before the season, I didn't really expect them to win the President's Trophy again. I expected them to pace themselves. As I mentioned the other day in the power rankings, I didn't expect them to pace themselves this slowly. This is a team that is better than their record. This is a team that was dominating in games that they were losing, which was the good news. The problem is now they're not dominating those games that they're losing. So now their play has fallen off. Their play was quite good. They just weren't getting results. Now their play has fallen off. And that's always the danger. Is that, you have a team you cheer for and you say, you know what, they're doing fine. They're doing fine. I know they're losing, but their numbers are good. Eventually, it can trend in the wrong direction because players get frustrated. They might be trying to force to do things by themselves that they normally wouldn't. They may not pay attention to some of the systems that they should because they're desperate for that next goal and frustrated they're not getting the wins. Florida has been really frustrating to watch because, again, they have better players than I think their record would indicate. And they're just not playing like it right now. There doesn't seem to be the fight back that the team had in the previous 2 seasons. And we can all have the debate about what happened and what caused that for Florida. So number 1 on the positive side of things is the Boston Bruins. Boston was expected by many, not by myself, to be in the playoffs. And I didn't expect it because they were without Marchand, they were without Grzelcyk, they were without McAvoy. And I felt like there were so many key pieces that were out of the lineup. And the discussion of whether Bergeron would come back, and then I had concerns about whether or not Krejci would be able to pick up where he left off after a whole year outside of North America and being in his mid-30s. And all of those concerns gone by the wayside, absolutely gone. And for Boston, it has been just miraculous how well they've played. I know that fans of other teams would not refer to it as miraculous. There'd be certain words they would use to describe this that I shouldn't be saying in a public forum. But yeah, Boston's been absolutely out of their minds good. 27-4-2 is the record now? Like, it's insane how good Boston has looked. If they're down, they win. If they're up, they win. If it's a tie game, they win. They just find ways to win. And at home, they haven't suffered a regulation loss yet. It's been just jaw-dropping how good they've been and how consistent they've been, even without star players in their lineup, even when players are out. They're still absolutely fantastic. They have that next man up mentality right now, and it works, where whoever comes into the lineup next does quite well. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always, regarding which teams you've been most surprised by, whether it's in the positive or in the negative. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.